All right, continuing on, we want to resolve each piece of this separately before we multiply. In between the parentheses here, right there where I put that little pink dot, that's where the multiplication happens, yeah? And before we can do that, we need to handle the power to a power of this, and then we can deal with multiplying. We have to always deal with exponents before we deal with multiplication. That's part of order of operations. So let's get those marks out of there, and let's do this each piece separately. We've got 3x to the 7/2 raised to the 6th. So what you do with this is that you give each part of that the coefficient, the 6th, and the x to the 7th, or to the 7/2 that 6 as well, like that. Okay, we'll deal with that, and actually let's just deal with that and see what we get for that piece of it. 3 to the 6th is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, and what you get here, if you group them, the associative property says we can group them and do any part of it first. We get 9 for this, and 9 for this, and we get 9 for this. So 9 times 9 is 81, so we've got 81 times 9, or 729. So that's what we were going to get as the coefficient on that, 729. Let me get my calculations out of the way here. Okay, and so that's what we get for the coefficient, the number. And then what do we get when we do x to the 7/2 raised to the 6? Well, whenever you raise a power to a power, you're multiplying. So what we were going to have here then is x to the, and we need to multiply 7/2 times 6. And you could multiply across and get 42 halves, which is 21. You can also, though, just before you ever did the multiplication, you could cancel these both by 2. You get a 1 here, you get a 3 here, and then you can see that this 7 times 3 is 21, right? So we get x to the 21st power. And we will multiply that with what we get here. I'm gonna erase this bottom part here. We had already distributed that and sorted that out. And I'll get rid of this. And now what we're going to do is the second piece of it, which is the x squared raised to the 6th. X squared raised to the 6th. That's a simpler one to deal with, but we're doing the same thing. Power to a power says that you take the exponents and you multiply them. 2 times 6 is 12. Okay, so what we're doing then is we're saying, okay, we've got 729 x to the 21st times x to the 12th. That is what we get once we deal with the exponents. Okay, now we've got to put it all together. There's a coefficient, I should say. There's a coefficient of 1 on x to the 12th, the one in purple. And so 1 times 729, that's just going to give us 729, right? We normally multiply the exponents together, but there's an exponent of 1 on x to the 12th. But then we need to say, okay, now if we're just straight up multiplying, we will add these two exponents together. 21 plus 12 is 33, and what we get there then is 729x to the 33rd, and of course that is A right there. Okay. The trick with this one is to do this in pieces. You're going to raise any power to a power, like this piece here, and then do this piece here separately. Then once you get the resulting numbers like we have here in pink and purple, and in fact, let me actually put that in purple so you can see that that's where that part of it came from, if you can notice that. Right, that results in this results in that, and then you put them together, okay? So we're going to do the same thing on the bottom here. We're going to do each piece separately. We're going to take first negative 5, g to the 4th, h to the 6th, and we're going to raise it to the second power. And what we get there is we essentially get negative 5 to the second power times g to the 4th to the second power times h to the 6th to the second power. That's the first bit of it. Okay, and I'm going to write it up top once we get the result. So what is negative 5 times negative 5? It is 25. That's this piece. We're doing all this right here. Okay, that's 25. What is g to the 4th raised to the 2nd? That is g to the 8th. Remember, power of a power, we multiply. And what is h to the 6th raised to the 2nd? That is h to the 12th. Okay, so that's that piece of it. And now let's do this purple section. And what we've got there is g to the 5th, h to the 5th, raised to the 5th. So if we split that exponent up and give it to both pieces individually, we get g to the 5th raised to the 5th and h to the 5th raised to the 5th. Okay, so what is g to the 5th raised to the 5th? That is g to the 25th, because power of a power, we multiply them. And essentially, this is, if you raise something to the 5th power, you're multiplying it together 5 times. So this is g to the 5th times 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 g to the 5th. And you can see if you wrote it out as just multiplication 5 times over, instead of raising it to a power, you would then be adding them, and you would add 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. That's the same as 5 times 5. Okay, so then we say h to the 5th raised to the 5th. That is h to the 25th. And what does that result in? What is that going to result in? Well, it's going to result in, you can see here that there's a coefficient of 25 on this set here, and there's a coefficient of 1 here, so 25 times 1. We're really just getting 25. And then we say, okay, then g to the what? G to the, here we've got g to the 8th, and here we've got g to the 25th, straight multiplying, and so we've got to add them together. We get g to the 33rd. And then h to the what? We've got h to the 12th here times h to the 25th here. Again, we're multiplying those two, so we add the exponents, and 25 plus 12 is 37. So we get h to the 37th. And if we look through here, we will find that indeed we have that answer written right here for choice C. So choice C is the answer. This is a bunch of steps, I realize that, but there's nothing particularly more difficult than the simple ones, except there's more steps. You're still doing the same thing. You're first raising each to the power, each part of it to the power, like we did down here. We take that first set that's raised to the second power, and we give that to the second power to everything, and then resolve them individually, like that, and then take the second part here in purple, raised to the 5th, and we give that to each piece separately, and then resolve those. Then we do the multiplication. Yeah? Hope that makes sense.